praise. And with the stages of meditation, just in the last minute I have before it's 10 o'clock, I just want to say I realize that this is challenging material for many of us. I include myself in that. I would just encourage, like, this is why Geshe presents two texts, right? So that we have this like really, really kind of philosophically oriented text as well as a devotional text to kind of keep the equilibrium. But I would just say don't get discouraged with the philosophical teachings if you're unfamiliar with them. In the West, we kind of have this idea that like we have to understand things right away or else there's something wrong with us. That is not the case at all. With these philosophical teachings, you have to hear them again and again, and slowly, slowly they will start to sink in. So just on that note, if you have questions for Geshe, don't be afraid to email me. A couple of people already have, and I'm always happy to help facilitate that conversation. On that note, I'll stop nattering and I will invite Geshe down so that we can get started. Grab yourself a cup of tea or coffee and make yourselves comfortable. So hello, everybody, and welcome. Can you hear me okay still?
Yeah, Ganga.
And how about Geshe? Can you hear him? All right, then let us get the show on the road.
Oh, yeah, Ganga Tashi Dele to Tangaroso. Bota Matsika Karasigarata, Matseto Demandreta, watching her, Cherio, Sombata, Gabugaris.
So first of all, Tashi Dele, greetings to all. And Geshe encourages you to recollect that, you know, these sessions are all about taking something of meaning, establishing something of meaning with our human life. And, you know, therefore, when we're listening, we want to bring forth an attitude of joy.
Ota Tenda Nanzo, Ota Shato Pain, Persegare, Soso Chiposono Tone, Ani Lekache Momoyar Chishawa. Ani Yesono Tone, Ani Chishawa Momosono Toyaras.
And so when we think about the various Dharma activities we do, there are some that seem kind of more related to our own welfare or purpose, and there are others that seem really more specifically oriented to the benefit or the welfare of others.
Otashivu Tombata, Ota Toward Jetashivu Tomba Shoji Sambas Jeva Mumbo, Shenela Tagazamares, Lodo Lo, Talo Jatra Mumbo Jeva Shenela, Ta Yashute, Ota Yeso Notonella, 다 롱대용 타시마 예대용 타시마 로야지 용근도스
But the bodhisattvas, the great realized practitioners, they thought over the matter of the Dharma for hundreds and hundreds of years. It was a discussion that was going on for a very long time. And they came to the conclusion that actually for all practice, if we do it mainly with the motivation of working for the welfare of others, that one's own welfare is naturally achieved as a consequence of that.
다 소소도 다녀 소소도 다녀 들이 유유치자 미빠자 춘주치소노 돈에 내가 가서 제바 이나요 대시 다체 토버려야 돼요 되네 이나요 부대 타시 맞은 로야만 되스
So if we have as a motivation just the limited scope when we practice, just sort of for our own benefit, right? This can, of course, help us to establish the causes for a minor or personal happiness, but it is not a good basis for achieving the lasting happiness of both oneself and others.
다 던지서 따와 이는 예소노 돈에 내가 제바 이나래 치기샤와 롱소노 돈에 치기샤와 내가 제바 이 된다 나가스다 자침부터 대시 템보 용야지 내가 지금 요바 다 지바레티 하레스
And so the funny thing is actually, whether at the beginning of the session we establish a motivation seeking our own welfare, or whether we establish a motivation seeking the welfare of others as well as ourselves, those two motivations don't make any difference in terms of the self, the I, being able to achieve welfare, right? Both of them contribute to your personal welfare.
다 던지지래 던지 이사 라마 쪽가 뱅아로서 라자 첨보지라 솜바 예데소나 로데 쇼든 저바지 용거두스
So it is for this reason that Lama Tsongkhapa in the Lamrim gives the pithy advice that through seeking the welfare of others, one's own purpose is excellently achieved, right? That is the meaning of those words.
다 체리 바르지나 요따체 모모서는 nga 세대 가제 배제 모아 또이나 될 나서 모아 되거두스
And so various different types of scientists, they actually see that people who use the word I, who use the word self, most frequently are those who experience more upset and depression, more unhappy mental states.
다 가르세기 요서는 롱진저가 다 강에서 다 머셀이나 강에 먹어서 요 바데코 시보라 체기 요아레스
And so what does this show us? It shows us that the self-centered attitude, that self-cherishing actually, the more that this is in the mind, the more sort of
소소니 그
I just
대대지
lost
시보
my train
메바티
of thought.
롱진저가 머셀이나 강에서 요 바데 시보레
Right.
디아레스
So we can see that self-cherishing, it causes so many of the problems and unhappiness that we encounter in our lives. And just one short thing, I think that self-cherishing is kind of like not PC, it's kind of a dated term now. So if you want me to use self-centered, just let me know in email or the chat. I'm happy to switch that. Losuke.
다 던지지 다 간조 레가치 대야 레바 고시 세 고시 셰토야지 다 가서 터터 레가치 보게 셀 노아 슈나 하고서로 때는 머셀이나 얘기고 어느 샤와고 기보지 요
But if we can cultivate according to this sort of larger framework, and we can use that to activate our mind, to make full utilization of our brain and intelligence, we'll be able to more effectively achieve the happiness of not only this lifetime, but lifetime to come in the future.
다 치기 샤와서 돼 다 시도로와 티소 고서 가르제바이나 이니 멘저 세 가빙원에 제가 같이 버려서 요아레스
And whatever Dharma activity we engage in, whether hearing, contemplation, or meditation, we want to be able to bring forth a sincere attitude of joy with that engagement. This is also something that's important.
다 예티 옛날에 존재 선바수 옛날에 예수 주에 된 연례 도모하러 왔어
So, didn't
예수 주에 된 연례 도모하래 뒤노네라 고응이네 살래 그들 고응고따다 될 찐리 작은데 왔어 찐리 이제 바처저 잡아 찐리 소대 요아와
Yeah.
고응고 주거들라
Go to do.
찐리 땡에를 작은데 왔어
Oh, right. So then when we speak about the practice of the 6 paramitas or the 6 perfections, these 6 practices, right, are common to both the bodhisattva and the shravaka, the individual liberation vehicles. And if we look, tambo jimbarwa, tambo Sunju mare. Tene?
Gom go to gom.
Gom go to
So
do.
the she was not on Shiran go to
Yeah.
Tito at the end you can do us.
I'm totally confused. It's really unclear to me.
Jamba such as ever saw the Notarawa.
Yep.
That gong in and to go to Jagong in and go to Gurwa.
Yeah.
Tipora till the end you can do us. Yeah.
Sunju.
So te do Shira Yarwa Tama.
Yeah.
Tito al Sere.
Sunju.
You can do us.
Yeah, then
there is a Gawo Goyoba te Gola.
Yeah. So Geshe is okay. It was just really unclear. So then in terms of these 6 paramitas or perfections, so I'm going to give those to you. These are the perfection of generosity, ethical discipline, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. If we notice, actually, when we look at concentration and wisdom, effort comes before these. So what does that tell us? That tells us that as we exert in meditation, effort is something that is really necessary. Hakoson, you need to say
cancer. Sen Joato Ninete, Chiego Don Jugola in Joatu Garoas.
And so real transformation on the mind, this depends upon meditation, specifically analytical and placement meditation. And so when we look at the structure of the paramitas or perfections, it's concentration, which is kind of pointing to the practice of meditation itself. And because meditation is not just toil, right? It's not just something that is difficult. Joyous effort precedes that because we need a joyful effort to engage in the practice successfully. And so whether or not joyous effort is in place, this is going to inform whether our meditation practice is something joyful and light, or whether it is something that feels like toil, that feels really difficult and stressful. Yeah. And just to clarify, in the structure of these 6 paramitas or perfections, certainly we could say that there is meditation on the preceding perfections, right? Like, for example, generosity, ethical discipline, and patience. However, right, effort comes before concentration and wisdom, because concentration is the main practice of placement meditation, while wisdom is the main practice of analytical meditation. That's why it's structured that way. And so that's why in, for example, the Bodhisattva Charyavatara, when it comes to the chapter on concentration, it begins with a discussion of concentration's benefits. And so when we look at the structure of the teachings of the Buddha, we speak about the 3 turnings of the Dharma wheel. And when we look at the middle turning, which is considered definitive, we'll see that most of the sutras, the discourses within that turning, begin with an expression of the benefits of the mind that is being cultivated. And this is something that we can incorporate into our study and practice as well. Whenever we are studying, meditating, or practicing about a certain topic, if we begin the session with a brief recollection of its benefits, that can be very helpful. Yep. And so then in terms of beginning our session today, we're going to first begin with the nature of the fundamental mind. And so in terms of introducing the nature of the fundamental mind, His Holiness has some brief sort of phrases or pointings out for that. So Geshe-la's idea is that he'll incorporate that into our preliminary meditation today. So His Holiness mentions that when we're trying to tap into this nature of the fundamental mind, one of the sort of obstacles to that can be our 5 sense consciousnesses, which go out to beautiful forms, sounds, tastes, and so forth. This can be a hindrance. So what we want to do is try to set aside our engagements with those sense consciousnesses. Geshe-la was mentioning, you'll recollect the image of exhaling on a mirror and the condensation dissolves into one final point. This is the idea that the sort of coarser minds associated with the senses slowly pull away. And once that the sense consciousnesses are no longer sort of chasing all of these external objects, then slowly, right, the power of one's focus increases. And another obstacle as we try to tap into the nature of the fundamental mind are thoughts and regrets of the past. This can also be an obstacle. And so having this intention that I am going to set aside thoughts of the past is also really important to having a good session.
And
then the fears, hopes, and doubts that we have about the future, this is another kind of thinking that can block this meditation. So we want to make a firm intention to set aside thoughts of the future as well. Right. And once all of that mental traffic is set aside, there is going to be a feeling of an empty mind. Now, Geshe said this is not emptiness in kind of the philosophical sense. Rather, it is a sense of spaciousness in the mind. And within this sort of empty vastness, it provides us the opportunity for us to observe the qualities of clear and knowing of the fundamental mind. So when His Holiness introduces the nature of the fundamental mind, these are some of the key points that he will share with the audience. So if you have a long time, you want to go through each of those steps to kind of clear and then tap into the fundamental mind. But as we are of limited time today, what we're going to try to do is just start from this basis, from this experience of the fundamental minds being clear and knowing. So then when we talk about this fundamental mind's nature, we can see that it has 2 qualities, the quality of clarity and the quality of knowingness. So when we say clear, this points to the aspect of the mind which is often compared to a mirror, right? It is a vast surface which can reflect, which is unobscured. So knowing means able to understand whatever the mind directs its attention to. When that object arises in the mind, it can come to a knowledge of it. So that is a brief introduction to the fundamental mind. So what we're going to do now is we are going to take a moment to cultivate this in meditation. So whether it is a wholesome thought or an unwholesome thought, I am going to set those aside and I am going to relax into a peaceful state. Bring the mind and body into a state of peace. If any thoughts of the past are arising, don't follow those thoughts, but think, for the moment, I will set them aside. I won't pay them any mind. Future hopes, anxieties, or irritations, or fears, with the gentle breeze that clears away the clouds, I will clear those away from my mind. Just tap into a state of calmness here. We can focus here on a feeling of emptiness or absence, which is an absence of mental traffic and difficulties. Focus on that. And this emptiness, don't focus on a quality of nothingness, but think instead that within this spaciousness, I can begin to appreciate the clear and knowing qualities of my mind. Like a jewel of knowledge or a mirror of wisdom, any object that I direct my mind to, I can come to an understanding of it. One of the understandings that I can cultivate using the clear and knowing nature of my mind is that it is possible for myself and all beings to be free of problems and anxieties. It is possible for all of us to achieve a stable and lasting happiness.
내서 통화 농지 로와 용주 요와 메비다 링아 땡데 메비 대시지도 되나 쩌마루 손비토네 쇼마.
And based upon that understanding, then think how wonderful it would be if all sentient beings had a complete happiness that is totally untouched by suffering. Bring forth that wish, that mind of love.
다다 소마 농지 용아 치다 소와 지치다 딱요.
May I actualize this mind of love and this intention exactly as I wish. In order to do this, I will make praises and requests with single-pointed devotion to the holy beings. So we'll begin with the praise to the Buddha. Tumba chom den de jin she ba zha chom ba yang da ba zo be song ge je ba dang sha su den ba de wa she ba je den jem ba she bu du we ka lo gyur wa la na me ba la da mi nam gi tem ba song ge chom den de pe ja wa sha kya tu ba la cha ze lo che de kyab zu chi ho tenpa chom den de tishin she ba cha chom ba yang da ba zo be song ge je ba dang sha su den ba de wa she ba ji den chen ba che bu du we ka lo jo wa la na me ba la dang mi nam gi tenpa song ge chom den de pe cha wa sha kya tu ba la cha ze lo che de kyab zu chi ho chom den de tishin she ba cha chom ba yang da ba zo be song ge je ba dang sha su den ba de wa she ba ji den kyang ba che bu de we ka lo jo wa la na me ba la dang mi nam gi ten ba song ge chom den de pe cha wa sha kya tu ba la cha ze lo che de kyab su chi ho. We'll do a short mandala. So ji pe gi ju ji me to cha ji ra lin ji ni di kyang ba di song ge shin do mi de bo wa ye jo gu nang da shin la che ba sho i da guru ratna mendala kam niryata yami. Refuge and bodhicitta. Che dan so gi che nam la chang chu ba du da ni kya su chi da gi chi jen gi be su nam gi zho la pen chi re sang gi zho ba sho che dan so gi che nam la chang chu ba du da ni kya su chi da gi chi jen gi be su nam gi zho la pen chi sang gi zho ba sho che dan so gi che nam la chang chu ba du da ni kya su chi da gi che nyen gi be su nam gi zho la ben ji re sang ge zho ba sho. So we know that at the beginning, of course, of any Dharma activity, it's very important to engage in these practices of going for refuge and generating the mind of bodhicitta. And part of the practice of refuge, its benefit, we understand that is that it helps us abandon an incorrect path in favor of a correct path. So we shouldn't just say that as sort of a dogmatic point, but we should really develop a feeling for that as we recite the words. So if we were to explain briefly how refuge does that, right, then actually it's easy to come to an understanding. So we understand that all mistakes come from misunderstandings, mistaken ways of thinking. And due to those mistakes, then harm arises to self and others. So part of the precepts of refuge address this very problem. They tell us that that thoughts and actions that harm others are mistaken, and they direct us to abandon any harm of others. So that's a very practical protection of the practice of refuge. Any human or any animal, we want to abandon thoughts of harming them. We want to abandon thoughts and actions of harm towards any sentient being, right? So this is part of that practice of refuge. So you see from this example, right, that the practice of refuge already stops us in a very powerful way from going down a mistaken, harmful path. So the mind generation then takes that a step further. Not only do we want to abandon harming sentient beings, but we want sentient beings to have happiness. We actually want ourselves to be able to contribute to them actualizing that happiness. This is the mind generation. And of course, to actualize this wish of the mind generation bodhicitta, we need courage, we need power, we need confidence. All of those things have to be in place. So His Holiness the Dalai Lama says that when bodhicitta really comes into the mind, the experience that the practitioner is going to have is that so many of their difficulties and upsets, they dissolve like a rainbow dissolving into the sky. Thinking I'm going to clear all the problems away of others, I'm going to establish others in every happiness. That mind is difficult to bring forth, but think about how much of your frustrations would just dissolve away if you were really able to bring forth that mind. And all of the small situations that irritate us, that we grasp onto, if we stop the centering of ourself and focus on the happiness of others, we won't be as upset by those situations. That's what His Holiness teaches about this mind. All of the essential instructions for developing bodhicitta will have these benefits, right? They all show how to tap into the mind's power, into our courage and confidence in a way that will bring us greater happiness. So really, we want to develop this mind as one of our main practices. We want to pray and make supplications for assistance in developing it. We want to dedicate our merits to being able to bring forth bodhicitta.
Ya gos jaba yina yo.
Yeah.
Shoju je se to san mi se ba.
Yeah.
To me ba yin te to ya le ten de ko. Pa cha ma ro wa ji jo so ma shu na. Tani ta de ya res.
And as we meditate, right, even if we aren't able to actualize bodhicitta in this lifetime, right, we should have the confidence that every time we try to develop this mind, it places a powerful imprint for its development, for its realization in the future. So just a brief comments about that. And now let us take a moment to meditate upon the motivation. Make the body and mind spacious, purify them, and bring them into a state of peace.
Bala tene maybe ta jazo chimbo shawa lele yoba no yise kayuba. Shawa lele yo so much.
Just when the wind stops blowing, this waveless ocean, its vast and clear expanse, our mind becomes like that. In this vastness, in this clear and knowing expanse, I'm going to place a seed for the most beneficial mind possible. And in order to be able to plant that positive seed, then think. We want to bring forth the attitude of the uncommon Mahāyāna refuge. So from a place of love, awareness, and mercy for others, according to your own understanding, bring forth the mind of king light. In other words, I will achieve enlightenment and lead all sentient beings there.
Nga se te das, sunji chato bas shina je kona yo te mugi pa je de somba no jita de ya chi yong ta te do ya gala somba no.
This self or this I, if I am going to be able to bring it to Buddhahood, having realized that Buddhahood without having to exert myself, I will naturally always be accomplishing the welfare of others. So we will pause it there. So in order to realize this, of course, we need the practices of method and wisdom. And in terms of where our discussion is of the text, we're mainly talking about how to develop that wisdom.
다 시라데 같이 뭐 이자 다 야가 그 개파 다 배가 개파 강기 다 시라 그 돌을 버게 따와 그 돌은 내가만 나와 용야 돼요. 저더니 이제 되게스.
And because wisdom is so key, right? This is why all of the great panditas of India, all of the great scholars of Tibet, they put so much time into discussing the view, right? Into discerning the view as a way to develop that wisdom.
따와 그 제시에 대하테 다가제 제자야도 다가제 개파가 메도야 대존지께 제대야 대대 드니께 말아와.
They weren't having these discussions about the view to appear scholarly, to establish a scholarly career for themselves, or to somehow become famous or something like this, right? They were having those discussions to develop wisdom.
제자야 뭐야도 야를 때는 이나 쪼쪼 땡아로서는 내가시게 짜와 말이 바래. 나저 말이 바샤. 나저 말이 바 메바서 알아 차도 노지.
Yeah.
중앙에 가발라 차와지 이제 미지 그거서 왔을 노지 카테 따다데 그 소리인데 다리가래.
So then, of course, we understand there are some polemics. There are some arguments among these various scholars, right? That sometimes happens. But the bigger picture is this. The root of all of our suffering and difficulties is ignorance. We understand that in order to get rid of ignorance, we need to cultivate its opposing factor. Just like on a very cold day, we need to turn on the heat to bring some warmth. So it was for discerning most correctly, most effectively, the opposing wisdom to that ignorance that all of these conversations take place, right? So that's the scene.
다 든지지 다 대배배배 어다도 로도 만도텔 다 코로문다와 개파소소 손스문다와 용기야이다. 다와서는 디게자로 왔어.
So how to best cultivate the opposing factor to that ignorance? Scholars had different opinions on that. And because they had different opinions on it, that's why we see these different discussions of philosophical views. So all four schools of tenets, right, from the Vaibhasikas all the way to the Prasangakas, they were propounded for the sake of us being able to reach temporary and ultimate happiness. This is important to recollect. So actually, we need to cultivate an understanding of each of these schools as an ascension to come to a proper discernment of the view. This is important. Yep. So if we can start with an understanding of Vaibhasika, Sautantrika, and then slowly cultivate our way to the middle way schools, we'll have a very good understanding which can counter this belief in natural existence. So if we look at the progression of the great Pandita Vasubandhu, for example, right? He started out as a Vaibhasika believer, and in fact, he was very critical of the Majjhimika philosophies as well as of just the Mahāyāna in general. But based upon his understanding of the Vaibhasikas, slowly, when he turned his attention to the other schools, he was able to develop an understanding of them and eventually reach realization. And Vasubandhu, he came to regret all of the denigrating remarks that he had made about the Mahayana teachings. He felt really bad about it. He felt really bad about that, so he sought a way to purify that karma. So Asanga as kind of a way to try to shift Vasubandhu's view about the Mahayana, he would recite Mahayana sutras within earshot of Vasubandhu's home, just so that Vasubandhu would at least hear them. And Vasubandhu said, okay, the causes being described in these teachings sound good, but what is actually the result of them?
Yeah.
So Vasubandhu, initially he didn't have any interest in listening to the Mahayana teachings, and certainly, that he didn't seek them out, but just by that recitation happening outside his home, some of the words of the Mahayana teaching would reach his ear.
손 페지
제부 페인 상기기 제부 So, but they didn't seem to move Vasubandhu's mind. So then Asanga thought, okay, let's recite some of the Mahayana teachings about the benefits of the result of Buddhahood. Yeah. Teacher cheek na teacher cheek last day.
다 근데 쇼는 다 건조한도네 다 간지 뭐서는 다 바바토메 대하고 살아서 고시라 첨부 여봐.
야야.
될라때는 건조한도 코로코로 지엘레메 와서 다시 지바레스. 로비니. 아주 개자 고거만 괜찮아. 다 건조와 시에네라. 엄마 대바 첨부 거 카모 또 살아와. 다 간지 문도 코로코로 지엘레메 와서 내가 지바레스 뭐.
수.
Right.
So then, as Vasubandhu was hearing these teachings, he came to sort of an understanding of them, and then he started to develop a regret for some of the negative things that he had said about the Mahayana. And so he actually approached one of Asanga's students and expressed this regret. And Asanga's student said, actually, you don't need to feel hopeless about this. I will bring you to see my teacher, and my teacher will propose a remedy to you for this denigration of the Mahayana teachings. Yeah. And they were brothers, of course, but I guess they had become estranged over some time. So based upon his student leading him there, Vasubandhu was sort of reconnected with his brother.
코로니 촌촌을 내서 드리게 이때가 상한 걸 제가 잡이 갈라. 파파 투명예시 요아를 말에 당예시도 간가 요아로 왔어. 로베 인연을 디딩 예시도 드리 토요 말에 때는 리파 차고 이제 내가 제가 잡이 갈라 로베 인연 토로 요아세요.
And it's interesting because although, there's this view that, Asanga was holding the higher Mahayana view, when it actually came to their debates, it was really interesting because through his practice, Asanga possessed a degree of clairvoyance, which Vasubandhu did not. He didn't have any clairvoyance, but because of Vasubandhu's superior intelligence, he was still able to often defeat his brother in debate. Yeah, so this also shows us that wisdom we make such a big deal about clairvoyance, but wisdom is often far more valuable than clairvoyance. That's another important thing to understand. So of course, this conversation unfolded between the two brothers, and Vasubandhu felt tremendous regret, and he really wanted to be able to kind of clear away that karma. So he said to his brother, Asanga, please, you are able to communicate with Maitreya. Please tell Maitreya that I have a question for him. I need to meet Maitreya.
Tene jawa shambala paba to me shivi kalta sen del ko dipad le tiga done ramandu is ina yo koro tepage dipashaya ge tenda donga jayina chi re ju jawa sta ju mo ji ar sodo ane tene zomba ina tene shawa ji manga inda ja chu.
So then Maitreya actually said, because of Vasubandhu's previous negative statements about the Mahāyāna, because of the heaviness of that karma, he would not be able to perceive him even if they met. But what he should do is, with the four opponent powers, compose treatises of the Mahāyāna, and in this way clear away those karmas. So Geshe said, clear away that karma. So Geshe said he actually composed many Mahāyāna treatises. It might be Abhidharma that was spoken about here, but generally he had to compose those. Yeah, so the Abhidharma Kosha, right? The root of Abhidharma is one of the main texts he composed. Gandhi. So Geshe said that when he was having some difficulties, right, memorizing the Abhidharma Kosha, he reminded himself of this, if I memorize this, just like Vasubandhu, I'll be able to purify much negative karma. So that helped him to remain determined in his memorization. Yeah, but now he's forgotten a lot of the Abhidharma Kosha, but at one time he remembered most of it. So why is Geshe sharing this with you today? Because understanding the view is difficult. So whether you are familiar, or especially if you're a new person, it can sometimes seem that the view is really difficult to understand. So you might think, why am I doing this? So we need to understand this is very much related to diminishing our suffering and helping us achieve happiness. That's why we do it. Specifically, the view answers the question of, if all of the suffering we experience in samsara is rooted in ignorance, what is that mind of ignorance and how is it functioning? And then the second part of the equation is, if we understand what ignorance, what a lack of knowledge is, we can think that it is a target. How do we shoot the arrow of wisdom to penetrate that target? That's the other part of the picture. So we want to see which arrow is going to be most effective in penetrating that ignorance. Is it going to be the Vaibhasikas? Is it going to be the mind only? Is it going to be the Svatrantrika Madhyamika or the Prasangika view, right? We want to understand all of the arrows and then know which one is best to point at the target. So having said that, this is our objective explanation, in other words, the subject, and we will turn to our text. So we're turning to the text, and sorry, so I spoke with Geshe about this yesterday. Unfortunately, in the translation we have of the text, there's an entire paragraph of 4 lines which is missing. And these 4 lines are actually really important for understanding the view. So I was able to find the 4 lines which I have written on this card. And just so if you're wondering, Kedrip's reading that, I don't see it in my text, this is the reason. And so I turned to the translation by Geshe Lundrup Zopa, Elvin Jones in order to find this missing piece. And you'll see when I read it, it's a very important piece. So you might want to note it down. That's okay.
Sorry,
I just don't want people confused. What's Kedrup reading? So that's how that happened. Oh. So here is when we speak about all phenomena, there are some ways of thinking. When we speak of all phenomena, like what are those phenomena like? So it is related to that. So then when we speak about all phenomena, we can speak about the 5 aggregates, the elements, and the sense powers, and so forth. So sometimes when we are thinking about how all phenomena are empty and impermanent, all phenomena feels really difficult to our mind. So a trick that we can do is just direct that into the 5 aggregates. We can direct that into the 5 aggregates. So generally, when we speak of phenomena, they fall into 2 categories. So try to remember, what are those 2 categories? They are permanent and impermanent phenomena. So impermanent, if we think of impermanent, this is the broad category of phenomena. We can think of ourself, our body, houses, mountains. We can think about a flower that we look at, how it is changing from moment to moment, disintegrating, and so forth. These are all examples of impermanent phenomena. But then when we come to the discussion of the self or the I, this is where we find a really big divergence between the Buddhist and non-Buddhist views of philosophical views, of India. So many of those views were holding that the I was Atman, in other words, a permanent, truly inherently existing self. So this is one of the main reasons why the Buddha had to come into the world, because if this view that there was a permanent existing self was never challenged, then that view would mean that beings could never experience the bliss of liberation. For liberation to be possible, the view of selflessness had to be propounded. So just advising here that if you're trying to contemplate the emptiness of all phenomena and want to conceptualize that somehow, think, for example, of the 12 sources, or think of the 18 elements. This can be really helpful for that. And then you may think, well, what are permanent phenomena? What's an example of permanent phenomena? Empty space is an example of a permanent phenomenon. And emptiness itself, in the philosophical sense, tompani, emptiness, this is also a permanent phenomenon. So you have 2 examples. So whether it's emptiness of the mind, emptiness of the self, emptiness of a particular object or phenomena, the emptiness of all of those is something which is permanent. And then within the 4 Noble Truths, there is another permanent thing. So maybe try to think what that is. It is true cessations. True cessations are permanent. And then within the Dharma Jewel, there are aspects where you could make an argument that parts of it are permanent and parts of it are impermanent. Perna? Perna? Chugi kunchuk? Gokten, roa, dichu kunchuk, roa. Lamden mitaba. So for example, true cessations are permanent, whereas true paths are impermanent. So that's something to think about.
다 손지가 끝이잖아요. 아니 하고서로 뒤는 따봐야 못 따봐야
And within the four bodies of a Buddha, there are also kayas or bodies that are permanent and kayas or bodies that are impermanent.
다 끝이는 따봐지인데 왔어. 끝이서도 못 따봐래스.
Oh, so only one of them is permanent and the rest are impermanent.
야, 따봐서래서는 뭐니까.
So it is the ngo niku or the svabhavakaya dharmakaya which is permanent, whereas the rest are impermanent.
All of
the others are impermanent. Again. So, I'm going to read this. So we're in the last paragraph of page 26 for those of you who are following. So the physical aspects of the aggregates, sources of perception and elements are, in the ultimate sense, nothing other than aspects of the mind. So what this is saying is that all of these 18 elements and so forth, for example, that are associated with forms, right? The various sounds.
대지 강가 그게 실로 진이 여버지 노여리 던지지 실로로 야 말다 강가 세가 오래.
So what this teaching is saying is that all of those things to which our mind is attracted, the beautiful forms, tastes, sounds, smells, and so forth, which we perceive as external objects, none of those are external objects whatsoever. There is nothing external. These are only appearances arising due to the mind.
세가 노로는 니빠지 실로로 치노 용거 야래. 세가 노로는 니빠지 야면 더니 코 시바찬도 야래. 대니
Right. So it is, the first part of this is that what we are perceiving outwardly is on the basis of an imprint that is arising from the mind. So 타에디 semla tene chungiore dene.
So the
thing that is being perceived, the object, is arising due to the mind, and the perceiver itself, the mind via the sense consciousness, these are both arising from the same source, which is mind. So from this one sort of basis cause within the mental consciousness, we have, from that ripening, we have then both the object that is perceived and the perceiver of the object arising due to mind. So if we have this understanding that all that we are perceiving within the world is arising due to mind, as well as the perceiver, on the basis of that, the attachment, the aversion, the anger, the jealousy that we experience due to those objects will dissipate, right? That's what this view is teaching. Melong. Milam. Yeah.
Malom maybe gala. Hakosarawa, Malom maybe calling Aros Chapashas, Kondroshes, and Damada, Tele Chapashigre, Kondroshigre, Toa Namanda Jiaras.
The best example to illustrate this view is a dream. When you are experiencing a dream and seeing, for example, people you like, you feel attachment. People that irritate you, you feel anger or aversion. And all of the things that you are seeing in the dream, you have real feelings arising in accordance with that. When you wake up, of course, then you think, oh, it was a dream, and those feelings subside. But if while you are dreaming, you can be lucid and say, this is just a dream that I am experiencing. All of those difficult, afflicted emotions arising due to the appearance of the dream are going to subside.
Yeah.
So this is actually a really, if we think about it carefully, a really good example of how this view functions. Yeah. So think about a house where there's two people living, and one person thinks it's such a great house and loves it there, and the other person thinks this is a terrible house and is constantly unhappy. It's the same house. So what would this view say? That the reason for this is because each of the inhabitants of that house is viewing the house that is arising due to the imprint ripening within their own mind. So they're having two different experiences. So if you can cultivate that understanding and apply it to any external object, what's being said here is that that can be very helpful. Yeah. So I was just saying to Geshe, we want to clarify, right? What view is being expounded here? This context is really important, right? It's the Svatantrika view, and Geshe said also very similar to the mind-only or Chittamantran view. But this is not what we hold as the final view, the Prasangika. So I just want to give that context. And Geshe said these views, both the Chittamantran mind-only view as well as the Madhyamika Svatantrika view, are said to be very helpful for an understanding of cause and effect. So they're very useful for that as well. So we are continuing down then. This is because when they are broken into subtle particles, and the nature of the paths of these subtle particles is individually examined, no definite identity can be found. Yeah. So this is showing us that no matter what phenomena we look at, from the coarser down to the most subtle, if we sort of penetrate it with this wisdom, we will not be able to find an existing identity from the side of the object. So these Svatantrikas are saying, for this reason, there is no true existence, Demparjrupa, there is no true existence that can be found. But if we don't know this, right, we just see these appearances and we take them at face value. And because we take them at face value, we react emotionally with attachment and aversion. And through those reactions, samsara, the cycle of existence, continues to turn. If we're able to see all phenomena as like dreams, then of course nominally we'll experience disappointment and irritation, but because we understand the phenomena is dreamlike, we will be a lot less disturbed.
대 돈바르나 안달라 주일라 소바나 센전 nom발레 거나 메도 시제바샤고.
So this is where Kedrip is going to be reading from Geshe Zopa's translation because it wasn't included in this translation. It's a big chunk that's missing. Don't know why. So I am just going to read that. From beginningless time, we have falsely conceived unreal material objects. Due to misconception, material objects, which are the nature of mind, appear to ordinary people as if they are external, just like the appearance of forms in a dream. However, they do not exist apart from being aspects of mind. Think, this universe is mere mind. Analyze all of that all designated phenomena are only mind. This is an investigation of the essence of all phenomena. Geshe Zopa's translation.
다 템포 어단데 되었어. 다 나로서 뽀근 누지선 단다 바다 셔 토마메 바는 거 코데로 해서 되었어.
So it's here there's actually a word that says like the childish mind, which Geshe Zopa didn't translate. Really interesting, probably because he knows folks can be sensitive. Because of this childish mind that sees dreams as real, this is what keeps us circling within samsara. Yeah.
어단데 되었어. 어단데 되. 어떤 내 손은 또 가르다. 세 좀비 따와대 와라요 배도 첨부 좀 요래. 너는 첨부 적혀다. 세 좀비 따와 배제 또 기가 뭐 요래.
So related to this view, the Svatantrika, which has a lot of commonalities with the Chittamanjana or mind only, we can see how this can be useful to understand, and especially if one is a practitioner of Tantra, right? The Semsampa, the Chittamantra mind only view is very useful for us.
된 돈요도 코스 뭔데는 세조 뭐냐도 세시 코스세나 내가 고즈메고 간디지나 때도 세금 오지래도 마도 셀로시 야야만 되스.
So then we come, and this is continuing with Geshe Zopa's translation. One thinks the three realms are mind only. So the desire, form, and formless realms are merely appearing due to mind.
센지 오래 마도 세르베스는 말다스 오지와 노마도마도.
Ale.
She zuidatoro reja kanga senji ngores.
Yeah.
In a serebesan mares.
So we say that these three realms are the nature of the mind, but they are not mind itself. That's an important distinction, right? You can say the Svatantrikas or the mind only, they're saying that these three realms are the nature of mind. They're not saying that they are the same as mind. So that's important to understand too.
Pena, sabechila tiene. 리브먼다와 니시와 누지세스. 사베지라 때네. 리브 슈 니시에 용거와 때노지.
Loso. So we can think of this view as being like planting a seed that brings forth two results. And the two results that seed is bringing forth is the object itself and the object possessor. Right? Or the subject, the one who perceives the object. One seed, two results is what is being taught here. So seeing this plant, for example, this depends upon the objective side, right? The appearance ripening due to that imprint within the mind. And from the subjective side, the mind of the subject perceiving it via the eye sense consciousness. And the other classic example, which many of you will be familiar with, which is used to illustrate this view, is if you set forth a cup of liquid on the table, a hungry ghost will perceive blood and pus in that cup. A human being will perceive water in that cup. And a deva, a god being, will perceive nectar in that cup. This is another classic teaching that illustrates this view. So an object perceived according to the ripening of the imprint of the particular object possessor or subject, right? That's what this example brings home.
뭐야 뒤에서
Losage.
뭐야 대따라 치따바 타도는 세 코나 연바 또니 대라 소소로 따나 치동제 응원이라 소소 따바 이노시 senje 응원이라 소소로 또고 된 대따라 제도 대
So it follows then that when one investigates the mind individually, one is investigating the essential nature of all phenomena. In the ultimate sense, the mind too cannot be real.
리스와 단디 호트 갔다가 있는 치티가 세 연마라고 시는도가 세레자라고 요마레스.
So Geshe said that we have to be careful here. Remember, talking about phenomena as being the nature of mind versus phenomena being the same as mind or being mind, because when you read passages like this, you can fall into that view. Oh, it's just saying everything is mind. So that's an important clarification.
세도 오지 세마이 될라가스.
Those phenomena are of one nature with the mind, but they are not mind.
예, 됐어. 대다제도 통송아. 대동반은 센조 demba 머리때 단대로 집에가. 공기체 집행원이 줄라 소베 넘반집에 세니 나초제 넘반노와 대체 대dem바니도 갈란죠. 저 따라는 줄라 소반 점바 대저도 세종 될리까나 매빈 점바니도
So then we are nganso dunchido dunrwa. Right. So as we continue, how can mind that apprehends the false nature of physical forms, etc., actually be true? In the ultimate sense, the mind too cannot be real. How can the mind that apprehends only the false nature or physical form and so forth that appears in various aspects be real? Yeah. So as we continue with our examination of this view, we can see very clearly that the mind only in Śāntarakṣita schools, what they're saying is that there is nothing that is true from the side of the object, no true existence of the object. But for this view to work, there has to be some holding on to the true existence of the mind. Oh, sorry. So the mind only are saying that, there has to be some aspect of the mind which is truly existence for this to work. But the Śāntarakṣita yogic school, so this is one of the two schools of Śāntarakṣita, it actually takes this reasoning a step further and says, yes, all of these things are arising due to mind, right? All of these phenomena, appearances arise due to mind. Yet we also cannot say that the mind exists truly. Yeah. So if we are saying that these things are truly existent, there has to be a phenomena which can arise apart from mind and a mind that arises apart from phenomena. However, we can see that the phenomena that appear are 50-50. 50 arising from the side of the object and 50 arising from the side of the mind of the perceiver. So when we look at perception and cognition, a lot of the science around this is actually starting to come to a level of the view of the Śāntarakṣita Madhyamaka or of the Chittamantran, the mind only. Tanda change
Yeah, Chata zula soba, chiri zunyi matme, chata zula soba, na so che nomba yambi toswa. Chido teme ngoni mayin ba teje de sejo tele kana mebi chido teme ngoni mayin no.
Kundilash.
Kusa le maso. Teta ina,
Diwena semni ju.
teta ina sena jamala sube ngoni taba konago.
Loso. So, what is suchness like? It is the nature of all phenomena that ultimately are empty of the self of persons and the self of phenomena. This is realized through the perfection of wisdom and not otherwise. Oh, sorry. No. Sorry. Sorry. Mistaken. Wrong page. So just as physical forms and so forth are false, since the mind does not exist separately from the physical forms and so forth, which are false too, it too is false. Sorry, page 27. Just as physical forms and so forth possess various objects and their identities are neither one nor many. Similarly, the mind is not different from them. Its identity too is neither one nor many. Therefore, the mind by nature is like illusion. Sorry, that's correct. Los. Peikawalesa hamako ngala pain tata. Nga tambo norson shodranos tas shodron tata re.
Oh, ta shatun deru das nyedu kecha. Shatu chi kandi ji yoba yina te tambo hako kari yo na. Yuna chi le mua yoga rawas te ngazo hako rawas.
So the reasoning that this is based upon is that when we look at a phenomena, it has to be one of two options. There has to be one phenomena or many. One or many. Those are the two options.
Yes, wa. Ta te noji kasi demba tabati yo na te ripa thale ripa ta shi botsu yo res kaletana.
And the reasoning here is actually very profound if we look at it properly.
Ta demba tabati yo ba yina yuna demba tipichi. Yuna demba tipi tamaji yo res.
So we follow this line of reasoning. Okay, if there's a truly existent thing, there has to be truly existent one thing or truly existent many things.
Oh, ta tandi ita ngado ngayi pimbo. Hakosarawa medo kandi chita wa ina yo. Demba taba chido tate goyon zugu chusarawa madus.
But if we look at the I and my aggregates, or the self and the aggregates, if we look at I and flower, then so tana dene? Because they are arising together, we can't say that there is one that is inherently existent, or we can't say that both are inherently existent. So think about it. When you say myself or me and my aggregates, verbally we can express these as two distinct entities. But if you were to try to look within that construct for an I and aggregates that are separate, you would not be able to find it. Because within I and my aggregates, there is nothing that does not arise due to mind. There is no truly existent essence that we can point to. That's what the philosophy is saying. Hamako. Nanso sem gyuma dapo chikile stila pain. Dida. Yep. Yeah. Kung jogging be. Kung tuso ringpo re dua. Oh, tikite Josh. Yeah. So therefore, the mind by nature is like an illusion. Analyze that, just like the mind, the nature of all phenomena too is an illusion, like an illusion. Yeah. So we're going to stop here with the text, but just to think of an easy example, when you think about illusion, what does an illusion arise from? It arises from a magician or a conjurer who uses a stone or various chemicals to create appearances.
다 대노지 나로서 노게 바쳐 사회 뭐뭐지 요아 대지 하고서라와 대지 있잖니 짓지서 실로가 노한다 만다 되게 짓지서네 되는 나로서 그게怎么 먹어 놓은 거야.
So, like this, then, due to something within our mind, which is like the substance of the conjurer, there are all different sorts of appearances that are arising, and there is a false aspect to those appearances.
당연히 내설은 노지지 될 마음도 있다시고.
And that's why we say that from the ultimate mode of abiding perspective, that nothing exists in the way that it appears. So if we understand this, we can also understand how the Chinamantrins are not saying that form, smells, tactile objects, and so forth do not exist at all. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is that there is none that is not arising as an appearance to our mind. If we were to try to point to something tangible outside of the mind, we would not be able to find it. So then this is our conclusion of our discussion about the view. So this is our conclusion of the discussion about the view. But in order for the view to come out well, we also need to develop method. And so we will turn to the praise of Avalokiteshvara, who is the embodiment of compassion. So we are on page 4, second paragraph down in the FPMT translation. So we are making this appeal to Arya Chenrezig Avalokiteshvara that due to his nature of love and compassion, please help us to bring forth bodhicitta. We know that all of the holy beings, right, who became realized, who brought forth bodhicitta, that this happened through the factor of compassion ripening, right? So we are asking for assistance to bring forth compassion. And compassion is a really powerful mind to bring forth, powerful enough that really extremely heavy negativities, even if we haven't accumulated in this lifetime from past lifetimes, that by bringing forth the mind of compassion, they can be completely cleared away. Permeating all phenomena, you are the orb of the sky on a clear autumn night. Relied upon constantly by all fortunate beings, you are the uncomplaining great earth. Dispelling the darkness of ignorance of the entire world, you are the blazing sun. Soothing the torment of the mind burned by anger, you are the moon. Yeah. So permeating all phenomena, you are the orb of the sky on a clear autumn night. So just as the sky covers all phenomena without discrimination, encompasses all of those, so Avalokiteshvara, with his unwinking gaze, covers all of us with his love and compassion. Relied upon constantly by all fortunate beings, you are the uncomplaining great earth. So any fortunate being that has faith in Avalokiteshvara, he provides them immediate and constant support, just like the earth that holds us up.
다 시라기 찬이 시바 이나요. 하고서라와 또 미르베. 다 녀마돈다와. 예. 녀마샤게디 다 마리피가 주스 강가 통야 강가 통용고요 아이자. 대 노지 녀마샤와 노지 마리바 강가세 토고디 마리바르베.
So just like the sun is able to shine through any of the darkness, that Avalokiteshvara's a great wisdom shines brightly like the sun, able to dispel any fog of ignorance, able to clarify everything. It clears away that fog or the darkness of the ignorance with its brightness.
나로서 단달라 컨트롤도 쉐도도 드리가 그게 야 강해져서 되어라 왔어.
So soothing the torment of the mind burned by anger, you are like the moon. So practically, for many of us, this is a really important one because anger and aversion very quickly dominate our minds.
어디서와 왔다 나와샤와 노지 아파바시레지 되겠다 나와샤와 노지가 하고서라와 그거 드리가 강력한가
So like the light of the moon is considered cooling, the blessing of Avalokiteshvara is easily able to cool away our aversion and our anger if we supplicate. Right, yeah. So it actually says the rabbit-like moon, which the translator decided not to translate. That's because, in the Tibetan understanding, the form that we call the man in the moon, they see this as like a rabbit, that shadow on the moon.
Yeah.
So, and the moons have different names, just like we have the strawberry moon and so forth in English, they also have like the rabbit moon and so forth in Tibetan.
And
so this part of the prayer again is explaining the benefits and why it is very important to make prayers and supplication to Avalokiteshvara. And when we are looking for help or support, we need to recollect that Avalokiteshvara's gaze is unwinking. He always sees us and will hear us if we make supplication and request. So we shall end it here, and we are going to, with a joyful mind, dedicate the merits. Of course, if you need to get on with your day, please do, but we'll also have question and answer afterwards if you have time. Jangjo semjo rinpoche maje panam chejur chi chewa nyamba meba yang gone gondo pewa sho tongni tawa rinpoche maje panam chejur chi chewa nyamba meba yang gone gondo pewa sho Jambe pao jidar kiamba tang kundu sambo deyon dejente deda kungi jesu dalo chi gewa deda tamshe rabdungo dusun shepe gewa tamshe ge ngowa gangla chodu ngaba de dagi gewe tsawa digun kyang zambo chochi rabdungo Ngowargi Jambel Wawa Kangri Rawe Korwe Jingam Dir Pendant Dewa Madu Jongwene Chenre Ziwan Tenzen Jatso Ye Shape Site Bardu Tenjorji. So, on that note, does anybody have any questions? Today was the most difficult passages of the text. So if you have questions about that, you're welcome. But also, you're welcome to ask any question you like. Geshe thinks it was easy. Yeah. Sorry. Does anyone have a question? Anything
Go ahead, Annie.
to share?
Go ahead.
Could you please define again Dakzin and Dakje-zin, the difference between self-grasping and self-cherishing? I know that you're trying to avoid the word cherish and use self-centered, but I think this word of cherishing is pretty important because it has a higher, it kind of raises the stakes of why you think you need to do that.
Yeah, I prefer that word, but someone actually emailed me to say they were triggered by this word, and not wanting to trigger people, I'm open to different suggestions, but I also think that cherishing works philosophically for a lot of reasons. But anyways, Annie, I'll ask Geshe about the difference between self-cherishing and self-grasping is what you wanted, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Rang chenzen dang dangzen gi kepar kandes chikres.
롱 진짜도 단적이 제와. 롱 진짜도 단전이 또 배도 연만다와 첨보를 했어 저도.
So there's actually a big difference between these two types of mistaken mind.
다롱 진짜 sana 강가 집안다 버렸다 다 강가지.
And the nice thing about the self-cherishing definition is that this holds across all four schools of philosophical tenets. So you don't need to stress about it. It holds for all of them. Self-cherishing, Geshe is defining as a mind that exaggerates the importance of oneself, or only the importance of oneself and those close to you, and that because of this, one denies the needs and aspirations of others. One neglects others. That's the mind of self-cherishing. So it's an inflated sense of one's own importance and feelings, and because of the space that takes up, one neglects the needs of others. What happens with this self-cherishing mind is that it takes up so much space in our psyche that it doesn't leave much room for the consideration of the needs and aspirations of others. That's the difficulty. Dozen. Self-grasping is a mind that truly establishes the self. So the self-grasping is the mind that is holding on to an idea that there is a permanent, independent self that arises independently in the absence of causes. And we can use an external example to illustrate this. If we look at the flowers that are sitting in front of Geshe, we can see that there is a mind that is perceiving flowers, but along with this, there is a mistaken perception, which appears a truly existent, inherently existing flower that does not depend upon other causes for its arising. So this, of course, nominally we can understand, right, that all things, including ourselves, arise due to a complex coming together of various causes and conditions. But this habit to grasp at the self is somehow different. To grasp at it having some sort of independent, true existence. We have been holding on to this view for countless lifetimes within samsara, which is why it's important to target this view specifically with antidotes. So the grasping, the self-grasping or the ignorance grasping at the self, which is another term describing this same type of thinking, is thinking that there is an I, there is a self that we can point to, that is findable, that arises independently in the absence of causes and conditions. So another thing, self-cherishing and self-grasping, they get along quite well. They're good friends who kind of reinforce each other's mistaken perception, but they are distinct mistaken ways of thinking. They're not the same thing. And we can understand the difference partly from the perspective of the antidotes. We know that when we bring forth bodhicitta rooted with love and in love and compassion, that the stronger that mind becomes, correspondingly, the intensity of the self-cherishing is decreasing. But when we bring forth bodhicitta, it might be able to address the self-grasping a tiny bit, but it's not going to be an effective antidote to really reduce that self-grasping, right? It just works for the self-cherishing. So from seeing that one antidote doesn't work for both of them, we can understand that the ways of thinking behind these two distinct mistaken minds are different. Love, compassion, bodhicitta, their relationship to self-cherishing is as an opposite counterbalance, like heat and cold operate. But because they're not a direct counterweight to self-grasping, we can't expect that when we develop love, compassion, and bodhicitta, there's going to be a drop in temperature, like when we turn the AC on, right? Yeah. So that's the difference between those two minds. Is this clear, Annie?
Yeah, that's really helpful. I actually also feel like that as far as self-cherishing goes, it is supposed to trigger you, right? It's not supposed to be just self-centered.
Yeah.
I would think, because so.
Oh, you mean when we hear that word?
Yes, when we hear the word when we hear self-cherishing rather than when you hear self-centered, it seems a little bit more flat to me.
Let me see if there's something. I don't know how to communicate this fully, right? Because Geshe and I operate in Tibetan. But let me see if there's a way that I can use some Tibetan words to distinguish this a little bit, and see if we can get some of Geshe's thoughts on that. Let me see what I can do. Rang chenzen seriadi rwa dene inji nangla nganso self-cherishing. So gimi halepe ke chempo yempagi samsudapo chikrwa. Di peshe tangna mikashe nangwa dogyo mare rwa nga ke chempo yin sangshogi mare. Mikashe inji tsik jendak chiklagire self-centered, self-sena kilkil nganso nyamyongi nangla nganso kadine kilkil sogi res rwa di lavna yagadis. Gendi kola samsuyebe.
Mimita te nge cha kumar chonzo peshe karto rwa. Nge tanda desona sel dega.
Yeah.
Rungu tsa chimbo tsaton ye li tongwa.
Yeah.
Teji peche toyo.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so Geshe is saying he can't comment on that, not comprehending the nuances of English himself. The only comment he can give is what this mind actually is. So this mind inflates our own self and feelings and importance to the point where there's not room left for the consideration of others. That's how it functions.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
So from just seeing ourselves as supremely important, right, then the perspective of others have no place for consideration in our mind. That's why this mind is a problem.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. One more thing. Loso.
거때니 종아서 더 열어왔어. 그럼 진짜로 그 내가 또그 매야 이따 또 더고 말해 또기야 말해. 나 좀부터는 로진데 되게 말해.
So another part where the distinction between the self-cherishing and the self-grasping is very important, sorry, another context where this is very important, is if we think of the progression of a bodhisattva versus a shravaka, right, versus a hearer. So this shravaka, right, let's say Arya Shravaka, who is proceeding along the path, as they are reaching this state of becoming a foe destroyer, through their cultivation, the ignorance grasping at the self is diminished and diminished and diminished until it is purified. But because the Shravaka is not cultivating love, compassion, and bodhicitta, even though the self-grasping is defeated and they achieve a state of liberation, the self-cherishing imprint still remains in their mind. They aren't able to get rid of that self-cherishing. And so this is another way just to look at how the self-grasping ignorance and how self-cherishing operate in very distinct ways, how they're very different things. And Geshe is saying that, however, not to dismiss Annie's question completely, because he can't recollect clearly, but he has seen a scholar who argues that in essence, self-grasping and self-cherishing are the same mind. So, and it was a well-informed scholarly opinion. So he does recollect seeing that somewhere. But most scholars, what you'll find is that they distinguish these into two very distinct minds. Not to say they're not related, right? We see that they're related, but just that they are distinct.
But they just, for me, just because they're two different words, it seems like there must be some distinction then in the meanings of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And they have the definition. So the definition for self-cherishing you had, rang chenzen gi tseni gen dak dak lao so deni dangzen gi tseni labna kandes la kare.
Da dangzen se toshu de ni dangilaya terwa. Yo koro kona yo mati ba koro yo ba.
So Geshe said that, I said to Geshe, we had a working definition for self-cherishing or self-centered. So what would be the working definition for self-grasping? And he said just this apprehension that there is a self that is independent, existing from its own side.
Okay.
That's the Prasangika definition. Because, of course, when you get into the wisdom side of things, you have all these philosophical disagreements between the schools, right? So that's the Prasangika view. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let me see if I can see any more hands. Yes, Dave. Oh, Dave and Rebecca.
Oh, go ahead, Rebecca.
Rebecca, go ahead. Yep.
I just wanted to add that it could be that the problem is that the person has been told that they are a selfish, difficult, narcissistic personality the entire time of their life. And so what's happening is that actually both self-cherishing and self-grasping would be very difficult for them. And usually when you're told that as a child, it's an incorrect presumption by the person saying that. And I wonder if Geshe
I'll
Sonam
share
would,
this with him. No, but
Yeah.
Rebecca, thank you so much for kind of giving voice to this, because when I choose the vocabulary for translation, and just to be clear, there's precedence for both these terms here. When someone says they're bothered by something, I try to be trauma informed, right? So I try to think, is there a word I can choose that's going to be less triggering? But that presents a problem if the word is less precise, right?
Right,
So you have to balance those two things.
And I think that being narcissistic, which is of course a huge problem in contemporary society, it's probably one of the biggest problems.
Yeah.
If the person has been brought up being told that constantly, then they're very afraid of that as, an idea. So perhaps Geshe could, come up with distinct ways to understand these things, if that
Yeah,
makes any sense.
Yeah, no. So I'll pause here and I'll do my best to translate
Okay,
the
thank
gist of
you,
our
thank you.
conversation, Rebecca. Then nganso rang chenzen labna tsam di chigel gimi hop the kala tets nangwa jogyo mare Korean sana lo chungchu ne consult like semshuk mepa. Konso paladan amala cheron kadi ne rangjin sapores, cheron yapoyo mares, cheron so pentok chikyang mandus. Then konso tawadi nga chikyang mepa nga mi halepe duksha chik gi tawa chik yongire duas roa. Chirtang di yang tawa norgyo chikre duas. Yene di rang chenzen gi tsiklabna di younger di dabo chik yores roa nga rangi korla samlo tang mi choya dabo chik roa. Dene chichena dela tene nganso tsik dinso pesho tang du nyogdra yore dua di chik chi jendak di nganso narcissistics and so tsine labanangshin narcissists and la chik ko chu nanglo la tadu melong nangshin korong gi dongpa tane ko kandislau gare dona mangtra tene chunang la marsaksa re dua roa di dabo chikre di yang nyoktra re dua dene ko samso di re dua mikashe tsikti nangwa madrona
me ta tende nge tangila songas ro ta chimbo tsatana ye li tongwa sana akasa o te shi re sanganzol.
Right. Yeah, so Geshe said how he tries to address this is it's from only having space to consider ourself that we abandon the consideration of others. He thinks this definition can really help. Yeah, so he thinks that, a lot of this could be dealt with if you clarify what you mean when you say self-cherishing. And we say what we mean is the self-consideration is so much that there's no place to consider others.
Shira nyambono shoju semba chembo semba ni yare semba jite so tendo sono toya semba jite ye sono toya no yare.
So in the Heart Sutra it proposes a balance because you'll recollect the bodhisattva, the great being. So sattva means being as well, right? So we have two beings, the bodhi being, the great being. Why this appears is because there is the being that the bodhisattva considers who is themselves, their own welfare, and the being which is others who they also consider. So it's balanced. Yeah. So when we say the bodhisattva, the great being, right, we say bodhisattva mahasattva. If I say them both in Sanskrit, maybe it becomes clear. Bodhisattva mahasattva. Why are there two sattvas? It's because they're considering both themselves and others. And in some of the verses for taking the bodhisattva vow, it says, may I excellently accomplish the aim of both myself and others, right? So yourself is not removed from the picture. You are part of the picture with others. So seeing yourself as important, wanting to take care of yourself, just to be clear, this is not self-cherishing. That's not what that word means in the Buddhist context. So when we're explaining the concept of self-cherishing to others, Geshe really advises, explain to people that this is an exaggerated view of one's own importance that doesn't leave the space to consider others at all. Yeah, and the fault of this mind is that because of this constant fixation on our own needs, we abandon the needs of others, right? And that's not appropriate. And also to be clear that the problem of the mind isn't because it's considering the person's individual welfare. It's the space that consideration for one's own welfare takes up, which causes one to abandon others.
예치는 소노토사 사자마로 마자바.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like, so Geshe-la's got, I want to show them to you. He's got two pens, right? He's got a very dark blue pen and a red pen. And this dark blue pen is like the mind of self-cherishing, that its color is so overwhelming that red is not going to have any space on the page, right? It's like that.
세 코로 자체 뭐 거의 우빠던데 로데도 예데 강가 소노토 사자지 요아레스. 이나 키테 강가 톨라 돈네라 코로 집어 마도 예소노토 삼해봐서 사레스.
So let's be clear. The page is an empty blank page. It has more than enough space to consider both the red pen and the black pen, both the needs of the individual and the needs of all sentient beings. But because of the intensity of the color of this dark blue pen, it takes up all the space and others don't get considered.
저절 근데 수시던데 살 제가 뭐 쇼르고 요아레스. 뭐 가시 버스 도다네 코로도 코로 쇼르지 대사과.
Yeah.
So
Geshe says it reminds him of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings when the quote-unquote important people come to sit near His Holiness, and everybody wants to be sitting closest to His Holiness, and then people are falling on top of each other, and by the time people plonk down, everyone is uncomfortable because there's no idea of making a space or room for others. It's a little bit like that, right? So Geshe said he's seen terrible fights at His Holiness's teachings, which is really unfortunate, as have I, over seats, right? You wouldn't think. Yeah, so you know, so when you're explaining this concept of self-cherishing to people, if you use these kind of examples for a beginner, he thinks that could be really helpful. Yeah, and it's an attitude, the self-cherishing is a sense of greed, right? Just wanting to put ourself in the center of everything all the time.
The one thing I would respond is that the term that you used was self-consideration. And I think that's very, very important because it seems as if self-consideration has both self-cherishing and self-grasping in it. So you might...
Self-centeredness is what I used, Rebecca.
Well, you actually used...
Did I say so? Okay, maybe I did.
You actually...
Sorry.
I write everything down, so...
I believe you.
Yeah, so self-consideration is a very interesting term that you might want to think about what's inside it or how there are differences when you're trying to work out what to do. It could be that both self-cherishing and self-grasping are inside self-consideration. And that's the... You know, or not. I mean, it could be that narcissism is something completely different. I don't know.
I explained narcissism, Rebecca, so I did explain narcissism to Geshe, and I used the story of Narcissus falling in love with his own reflection in the pool to give him an idea of where that word comes from. But yes, let me see what he says about consideration. Rang tsiya, na di kechenpo tsigire, di kechenpo tsigimare, rang tsiya samlo tangna. Rang tsiya di nangla dagzin dang rang chenzin niga yurebes. Yeah. So in self-consideration or self-conception, Geshe said both self-grasping and self-cherishing could be present in that kind of mind.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, no, you're welcome. And, you know, and also please, folks, you know, email me with terminology considerations. I like to consider things. I'd love to discuss with other translators. We can be an irascible lot, but it's good to learn different ways of expressing things. Anybody else? Questions? Dave, sorry, you had a question.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thanks, Dave.
Hi, Mark.
So I'm standing at Starbucks in line, and the person in front of me starts having a long discussion with the barista, and I'm in a rush to get somewhere. This feeling arises, so it's kind of like the self-grasping. And right after that arises the self-cherishing that says that it's really important that I get to that meeting, and they stop having this long conversation. Yeah. Would that be a good description of self-cherishing and self-grasping and how they operate?
Yeah, I think that works. Let's see what Geshe says. Dene perna so Starbucks bangtrigla gude yorer wa. Dene coffee sogen ko cherong dunlagi mi keche mambo shene so coffee jelute late chagire dua. Dene nganso rang tangzin seria di nga dela tene jelute gires roa di dangzin gisem. Dene rang chenzen sena dela tene chichena nge meeting la leb tubgi omares mi di yapo sogi omares dinso ni sem yewa chetang di digire besa.
단 되어야res. 단지 그 손스 대로도 말했더니 이나 되어야ras.
Dangzin gisamso rang kandesre perna netsu di nangla Starbucks gudege. Di labna?
미미다 미미 서서 가르쳐 가. 단지 그 손스 때 단지 그 손스 때다 그냥 나로 집어 땡보지요 나보지요.
So Geshe says he likes how the the sort of sequencing of how this works, but he's saying that like the self-grasping doesn't exactly match. It's more like kind of an expanding self-cherishing. The self-grasping is the mind that thinks, I am here, I exist independently, I exist inherently. That's the self-grasping mind. So it's there, you can put it in that picture, but that would be actually what that's thinking.
다 땡보지요. 이제 나 질레 태야도 지레 니제 사대 시대에서 저도 저 땡보지요.
And because of that self-grasping, then this self-cherishing dialogue of, wait, I'm here. This person's taking too long. This could make me late for part of my day, right? That dialogue builds in relation to that initial self-grasping. But the root of all of the problem, where the whole mistaken dialogue started, was with the self-grasping mind. Did this answer your question, Mark? It did? Okay, great. Okay. And, but the progression of self-cherishing, this example works very well. First, a sense of our own importance, right? Me and my day are really important. And then a dislike and aversion for the person who's taking up that time and the whole sort of mental dialogue.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome, Mark. Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, I'd like to add to this conversation a little bit. I think it's all a matter of perspective, right? Because there are different perspectives about self, and where self is an important part of the path, and where it's a problem on the development of the path. So where self is an important part of the path is the whole topic of renunciation. If you misunderstand the context of self there, you will never be able to renounce samsara, because you won't value the effort it takes to emerge from samsara, because you think yourself is the enemy.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So you're saying that this healthy sense of self is important, to think that you're worth it and it's worth it to definitely strive towards liberation.
Yes.
Yeah. Then
so if you see that as self-cherishing, then that path is close to you.
Yes, no, that's a good point. Let's see what Geshe thinks about that. Then dangzin seria di duksha chikres, rang chenzen duksha chikres, yene rang chenzen duksha dapotsina, dene samsam lamla nögires, perna, ngenjung korla samlo tangna, rua, nganso ngepar jungwa gisem gogire dua, tarpa dundu nyerwa gisem chik gogire dua, dag seria di ke chempo chikyang mepa, dag seria di tsigo mares samlo tangna, dene nga ngone utsu jabne tarpa korwa le tarpa top gogire gisem kea teskale kapure dua.
야, 대딩이 당겨서 올라서 와서 롱진즈 세야된 거로 저기 주사 놓으소나. 대된데 용거래스.
So Geshe said this exactly relates to his point that if we are pointing to a mistaken definition of what self-cherishing actually means, it can really trip us up. This is an example of that. And that would happen if we're thinking self-cherishing is merely a mind that sees ourselves as important. if you think that's what self-cherishing means, yes, this could absolutely be a problem.
하고서라 다 이나요 롱자 첨부쯤을 jel리 동화대 두자래 잘라바이 띵조라대 유사요 말이스.
But if we clarify this and say from solely considering one's own importance, completely neglecting others, right? Then it can become clear for people.
되게 소소 답안으로 주고 말해. 어느 답안 되는지 여보 말해서 디노요색이요 말이스.
Because within that definition, you wouldn't think, oh, it would be selfish, like for me to try to clear away my delusions or something like that, or it's not suitable for me to aspire to liberation or something like that, right?
Well, the perspective is so important because even the mind wishing to emerge from samsara becomes a problem in the Mahāyāna perspective, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's like, this is the problem. It's all contextual, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
if we're talking about trying to produce the mind of renunciation, we have to consider it like this. But yes, I mean, with the bodhisattva path, you have to consider something else, right?
Yeah, but what's interesting is, even on the bodhisattva path, if you realize that you have to emerge from samsara because you're never going to be able to help others if you're still messed up.
This is the thing. If you don't get rid of your own afflictions, what use can you be of to others? Just very limited, right?
So that adds to a renunciation motivation from a bodhisattva perspective.
Yeah. Dene perna so nganso tarpa don dunyerwe lodi na roa ngenjun gogires roa di tsochi roa yene soso tarpa tobna dene semchen la par shagires di apo mendus di tekshen gi samlo tang chik doa dene di korla kande samlo tangores nga semchen yapo ropache gi chedu ngarongi nyomong pangores dela tene tarpa togores samlo tangna
다 대도 다 야슈들 와스테도 쇼딩 하는 거 야레스 다다. 아까서와.
Loso.
메다 대존지 셈벨로 슈로 다다 로 야라 와스테 야슈들.
Yeah, so Geshe is saying that this is exactly how we have to conceptualize it, right? That this, not individual liberation, but that this liberation from our afflictions and achieving this is absolutely necessary if we are going to be someone who can meaningfully contribute to the happiness of others and leading them to freedom. Right? If we bring forth, there's many ways, of course, to practice on the bodhisattva path, but if we bring forth this idea of achieving liberation from our afflictions so that we can be of benefit to others, this is one of the highest conceptual understandings of the bodhisattva path. And so to be clear as well, we don't want to totally denigrate the Shravakas either, who, they might not have this idea of achieving enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, but they might have some sort of conception of, if I was free of my afflictions, I would be a lot more capable of assisting others somehow, right? Even the Shravakas can have that. Yeah, but of course, ultimately that idea of moksha, liberation for oneself, it is not the final result, right? The final result is complete enlightenment for oneself and others. The highest result. Sorry. So, but the idea here is that part of what is holding the Shravakas back is there is some element of self-cherishing still there, right? And we can't purify those remnants of self-cherishing within our mind without engaging in the bodhisattva path. The bodhisattva path is what purifies that. Yep. So Geshe is just saying, especially when you're describing to new people this mind of self-cherishing, really useful to clarify to them that doesn't mean neglecting, ignoring your own welfare. He thinks that that's a caveat. Let's say, put it that way, that is needed. So did we answer everyone's questions so far? Rebecca, go ahead. Yeah.
No.
I can't hear you. I think you need to turn your mic
Yes,
on, Rebecca.
she's working on unmuting, but I think Rebecca was just giving a thumbs up.
Oh, was she
Right.
giving a thumbs up? Okay, okay. All right.
Yeah, it was just a thumbs up. I think this is a fabulous conversation and really very important. I think there's no question about that.
Yeah. No,
Thank
it's
you so
important.
much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. And that's why I'm glad when people send me emails, even if they don't feel comfortable raising it with the group, right?
pena nganzo da me se a chita nga da yi se a chita ngu da yo to chi shu chi le ngu duas de don da wa rong chin zela in course de si wo ja na ke je sa yo na
Ale. Doug, younger.
da yo do me ke je bi kal khashi da me si la ge do nga da yi za chi la ge do
Yeah.
de no dan duas nga zo so zo ngu dua
Yeah, yeah.
de di kal da me se a tan de re nga zo da yi se a tan de re se ya shi duas.
So an interesting thing Geshe is saying with language is he feels like this happens with the term dagme as well, with selflessness. Two different people can hear the word selflessness and have two very different understandings of it. One can
Completely.
think that selflessness means that there's no self, there is nothing there at all, whereas others might understand that we're talking about a specific type of self that is not there. So what do we do in that case? We give the definition of the word, and the definition of the word, right, can immediately be very helpful for that person. So it's a very similar situation.
ta tumbo pher ma de wa ji yo ba yin na yo ta kale kale de jan ko te ya shi si won duas.
So even if the person initially is uncomfortable, if we are well prepared with the definition of what these terms actually mean, we can explain and offer that person ease. That's why it's important to understand the definitions of the terms.
ta ten no ji dang ge rong chin zang ga zo yo ra ji ngu duas. Rong chin zi sen o de ya ko ma de wa shi so na de de shi si wo ja ne la.
Yeah.
Rong chin zi sen so za chi mo za de ji wo ma da.
Yeah. So taking the time to explain to that person who's saying, wait, you said self-cherishing, I'm not allowed to care about myself? Explaining, no, you're absolutely allowed to care about yourself, but you don't want to be so consumed in considering yourself that you neglect others.
So za chi mo zi zha ne ye li dong wa. Ye so no to sa chen me ba zo ya se chi si wa.
A mind that exaggerates our importance to such an extent that we don't have much room to consider the others who inhabit this earth with us as well. Right?
Ta te sen ta rong chin zi sa te ko sa ta da ma da wa ji duas.
And so then that will immediately say to that person, even if they react to the word, will say, but this is actually what that word means. And that can be really helpful in those situations.
And so
B, go ahead. I see you.
ya re.
Oh, I think your
Okay.
mic is still. There you go. Yep.
All right. Let me put it in a debate form so maybe you narrow down the scope of what we are talking about. So take an arhat, a Sravaka or Pratika Buddha arhat. It follows that it has self-cherishing mind.
Yeah.
So what's the answer?
Oh, are you asking, does an arhat or pratyeka Buddha, foe destroyer, have a self-cherishing mind? Is that your question, B?
Yes.
Is that your question? Okay.
Yes.
Then dra chompa nyentu gi dra chompa yona rang sangye gi dra chompa yona konso rang chenzen yorebes.
Ya.
They do. Yep.
Okay. So take arhat, Sravaka and Pratika Buddha arhat. It follows they do not have a self-cherishing mind because they do not have self-grasping mind.
Re de yene rwa nyentu dang rang sangye dra chompa yena konso rang chenzen yo chogyo mares karian sena konso tangzen pangsares.
Sen te ma da wa chen bo re dang ge je mo ja sa song was. Dang zi do rong chin zi ni ko ro so ma da wa chen bo re.
So Geshe said that doesn't hold because the way of thinking between these two mistaken minds, self-grasping and self-cherishing, are very different.
Kon zo rong chin zi me ba zo ya le ka chen zi ma so sten da.
They haven't defeated self-cherishing because they haven't worked at cultivating the antidotes to it.
Okay, take self-cherishing mind. It
Yeah.
follows that it is necessarily also self-grasping.
Rang chenzen seriadi kaduyene yang tangzen yingores.
Kan de. 단저.
Yeah.
이거만. 배도 못 나와서 가와ren가.
It's not self-grasping though. These are two different minds. B, I'm going to ask if I can phrase this differently. You tell me if that's okay. How about I try, if self-cherishing is present, is self-grasping necessarily present? Are you okay with me asking it like that?
Yes.
Okay. Rang chenzen yuna, tangzin yogaribis. Tangzin mepa, rang chenzen yongiribis.
단저 매바롱치
Yep.
요아레스 니지 다시 와당길라서.
There is self-cherishing in the absence of self-grasping. Example, foe destroyer, Shravaka, or Pratyeka Buddha cultivator.
That's what I'm asking. Okay.
Yeah.
So take somebody who has direct realization of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
It follows that person has self-cherishing mind.
Dene, oh yes, because I see, yeah. So let me just ferret this out to make sure I understand you, B. So you're saying that this Shravaka or Pratyeka Buddha foe destroyer, they've had a direct realization of emptiness. So they have, someone with a direct realization of emptiness necessarily has self-cherishing. Is that what you're saying?
So, well, according to what Geshe is saying, it seems like that's what he's saying. Somebody who has direct realization of emptiness can still have self-cherishing.
De re de roa dendre yena roa denenganso di rang sangye gi dra chompa yangmena nyen to gi dra chompa tongni ngosu topgen roa toni ngosu token re duas toni ngosu topgen rang chenzen yochogires.
야 요주.
Yes, one who has directly realized emptiness can have self-cherishing.
So what is the basis of the self in the self-cherishing? What are they cherishing?
Good question. Dene konso rang chenzen kare zingires dag me roa toksa rebes dag mena dene rang chenzen kandes yongores.
미미미 다 매세리 코론진들 가기네 마송아스.
Ale.
다 매세나 고나이 마티파 나매 손스지레 마토론진들 기도 못와스.
So the view of selflessness only defeats the mistaken perception of an inherently existent, independent self. It is not the direct antidote to self-cherishing.
예수는 또 매세 아텔 손스 주니 내가 용거 못와스.
Why? Because this direct realization of emptiness is not an antidote to an attitude that considers others, that does not leave room for consideration of others. Therefore, there can still be some self-cherishing present because the antidotes to it have not been cultivated. The mind that is its opposite has not been realized. So, another thing that needs to be mentioned here, this is not the case for the Arya Bodhisattva, meaning the Bodhisattva who has directly realized emptiness. Oh, sorry. And Geshe said, even not just with Arya Bodhisattvas, but right from the beginning of the Bodhisattva path, along with the wisdom, the Bodhisattva is cultivating bodhicitta grounded in love and compassion, right? And they have also a firm conviction that even their own rangdun, their own welfare, cannot be completely achieved unless they achieve Buddhahood, which is reached through considering both the welfare of self and others. So the bodhisattva who has realized emptiness is also able to counter self-cherishing because he or she has cultivated the antidotes to that, right, from the beginning of the path. Whereas the Shravaka or Pratyeka Bodhisattva foe destroyer or direct realizer of emptiness has not. So Geshe said that, B, for your question, the answer to this is probably in the space where you think about what are the ways of thinking between these two different types of cultivators. And similarly, all Buddhist philosophical schools, all four of them are going to hold that if the practitioner only cultivates bodhicitta, but does not counter the ignorance grasping to the self, then they don't you? That no matter how powerful the love, compassion, and bodhicitta are, they can never defeat the self-grasping ignorance because they are not the correct antidote. But they're definitely powerful enough to completely diminish the self-cherishing attitude. And so the difference, how you have to think of the difference conceptually, is the way of thinking behind these two kinds of mind.
So the root of self-cherishing is not self-grasping.
Dene rangchenzen gitsawa dangzin mares. No, it is not.
So which means we actually have two problems. Parallel problems. Self-grasping and self-cherishing, and two different antidotes are needed.
Yeah. Denengan so nyodra ni res dangzin rangchenzen. Denengan so nyembo nigo giduas netsu direbes. Correct.
Oh, okay.
That's why we need perfect method and perfect wisdom. Both have to be there.
I just learned something new today. Thank you.
Is it? Yeah, no, I'm glad. It was an interesting conversation for me. So I'm really grateful to everyone who participated. Yeah, it's different angles of thinking about things can give you new insights. That's why, although it's hard sometimes, looking into texts like this is really worthwhile. And Geshe said, think about it from the point of view of the result too, B. You need the Rupakaya and the Dharmakaya, right? You need the form body and the truth body. Yeah. So I think, no, there's one more question. I think I see Carol's hand.
Yeah.
Carol, go ahead.
Okay, I have two questions very quick. So, can you have a view of an independent self, but not grasp at it?
Okay, yep.
That's one question.
Yep. And you want to give me your other one, or you want to wait?
Afterwards.
Afterwards, okay. Yeah. Dene nganso dangzin seria di soso daggi tawa yona zimpa mepa dag yogi tawa yongchogiribes. Zinpa dangzin. Zinpa mepa dag yope tawa yochogiribes. You cannot. You cannot have a view of self that does not involve grasping.
Oh, okay. So next thing, I have read in a Lamrim text that when people are abused, their self-cherishing increases. So as a kind of reverse sense of importance, the unimportant is clinged to, and that would increase the grasping at the self as well. So I wondered what Geshe thought of this view that I've seen.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Let me see what he thinks. Dene lam rimgi deb nanglola rwa nupa mambo nyungen perna puku chungchun denso tetsuko puku chungchun denso konso paladang amala niepa mambo tangidua rwa dene nupa kiene dene konso rangchenzen shukchero drogires karinsena nupa ma ke gichedu dag serie di sunkyop chegores di kola samso kariya ale nupa keya mambo chungen denso konso pala amala yapo mendus konso niepa mambo tangires konso nupa kia gire duas yeah ane puku di sunkyop chia gi chedu ngarang dag seri di sunkyop chegores dela tane rangchenzen mangru drogires di samso kariya
mite samso kariya sana ta te mita keba zone akosara te amelo ndabozan dotona ro jinzala yo mane.
Yeah.
So
Geshe, I phrased it in two different ways, Carol, and what Geshe is basically saying is that's an understandable reaction, but that doesn't mean that, let's say, that child who's being abused, that they can't come to a middle way of protecting themselves from abuse without reifying their self-cherishing. He thinks that should be possible.
Yeah, of course, but most of the time it's not.
제 마토 더보 주주자 보게 돼서야 대부터 누치 첨부. 다 배도 가게 돈을 맞잖아요. 그거 가르서나 대서나 누치 첨부래.
Yeah, so he said it's a really difficult situation, right? But it's one that we all have to think about when dealing with any kind of anything that's harmful. We want to respond to the harm effectively, but do that without creating more harm.
먼저 새도 지발인데 와 새는 신화도 개발내는 녀보대. 콜레레 되는 녀보 못하나? 그 둘은 좀 왔어.
So we have to cultivate the antidote just to the amount that is required to overcome the problem without creating more trouble. Geshe said, think of the teachings on calm abiding, where when laxity and excitement are not present, we don't want to be cultivating introspection because that will actually become a hindrance.
I'm referring to the mechanism that self-cherishing and self-grasping can increase when there's abuse.
Yeah, so
That's all.
Geshe said it
Just to understand that.
It can increase, but what he's saying is he doesn't think that has to be inevitable, right? But do you want me to ask back? I can.
I just tend to see it in people who are working through abuse situations, that the view of the self can become, it's complicated, but I'm
like
just
a trauma response almost, right? Like
I'm asking about the general reaction in Dharma, because it's this thing of putting together the languages of psychological languages with Dharma languages. It's quite complex.
Okay, I will try a follow-up for this.
It's okay, but I think you've given an answer already. But it is about that, and that increase can very easily happen, that the self-cherishing and self-grasping can just be triggered very badly.
Nupa mambo kia gintin so perna pala amala halepe duksha yena puku kadi yena tungen yena garo kadi yena tungen yena roa dene nganso kandis lagre dunge de la tene kochena dunge de la tene tene rangchenzen mangrudo egi kien dabochik chatsigires kodi dabochik sangid
매매 로진의 제스 파슈데스 소소 파마
dunge nyongendi Dungen Yongen. Yeah, Dungen Yongen. Miden so nga kadini nupa kegi yensong, ngarang sunkyop che gres. Samso de la tene deni rangchen zen mangru jo gres.
Yeah, that dedo do was te jaja te dedo do gre te more.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, dedo chen do gre was. Na so su jo so ya tal shu chimbol ko pe do ngor was.
Yeah. So Geshe he hold on, let me just say what he said.
Yeah.
So he acknowledges that yes, like as a way of self-protection, self-cherishing can increase when we're trying to protect ourselves from harmful situations. He definitely sees that. Sorry, go ahead.
So that mechanism can come across as being unimportant. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a kind of reverse self-cherishing.
So when you're saying self-cherishing is unimportant, it means that self-protection becomes disregarded? Is that what you mean?
I'm not. Okay. The exaggerated clinging to the view of oneself as completely unimportant. Like a mirror reflection, instead of being overly important, you are overly unimportant.
So it's the opposite. You're diminishing yourself as a way of self-protection.
Yeah,
that's what you're saying.
but it's the same mechanism in the mind
that
produces the over as the complete, the self-esteem, self-effacement.
All right,
the whole
I'll try
thing.
to communicate this. I'm not sure.
The same mechanism, but instead of going over, it's going too far under.
Yeah,
but
I got
the same
you.
mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay,
Negative
sorry,
self-cherishing.
Yes, I got it. Yeah. So so we are half an hour over, so I think after Carol's question maybe we'll close if there's no more questions. Dene nganso rang chenzen seria di roa mangru drogeres. Yene sam ne pa kya chungen din so roa puku chungin di para amala dukshe chene kadine nga kechempo mepas la tene sunkyop che talche chegeres. Ngarang chikyang yomares drogeres roa ine ngarang chikyang yomares tangzingi nyembo drogeomares di sunkyop che gitap dapo chikres ko di samlo tangeres. Yeah, I don't know how to explain this, Carol. I'm sorry. I'm going to try one more time. Nganso God.
That
more English isn't going to help me. Sorry, at this moment, I just need to think how to put it into Tibetan. Just give me 1 second. Nganso duru droya gisamsudi nga halepe pugudi nga halepe chung suna dene nupa keya ne sunkyop chegires. This way of psychological thinking is not present in Tibetan culture. So it's it's not just a language problem, it's also a cultural problem. Yeah, he's saying, don't repeat exactly the words, give me the meaning, but I'm not sure how to do this. Nganso dag seria di chungru drone di sunkyop chea giche dires, dangzengi nyampo yo mares, yene sunkyop chea gi kunlong yotsang, di yang rangchedzin res.
Di
parshash nekap chik. Rangchedzin sunkyop chegi rangchedzin samlo. Di dapo yena mi soso nepa mambo kiena rwa. Dene soso chungru sone. Dag seriadi. Dag seriadi. Yeah. Pet mepa parshana dene nepa ke chungyo mares. Yine di dangzengi nyambo dro tugi omares, kariensena kunlong di soso sunkyop chea giche dures. Di segre.
Kalodo sucho zoya kecha mares. De koro dangzengi nyambo dro go marwas, dame inenze korke chechi ya marwas. Koro son tsitagase, sono matuwa.
Yeah, so okay. So what Geshe is explaining here is that way of thinking is more like a dissociation. Making yourself small is like a dissociation, but he doesn't think that is actually like a selflessness type of understanding, at least philosophically. So he said that he doesn't think that it's the same thing, like as the Buddhist term is indicating. Yeah. So say that there's a big snake in your house and the snake is venomous. And as a way of responding to that potential harm, you're thinking, I'm not here at all. I am dissolving myself. That can be an antidote to a fear, but that is not an antidote to self-grasping. Likewise, it's not a very effective antidote to the snake if it decides to bite you.
But
Geshe also said that when something is an antidote to self-grasping, there's an intention to it. So especially if you think of a small child that, let's say, for example, the parents are beating the child in a really abusive way. That saying that there's no self here that is experiencing this as a response to harm, that is not selflessness in that philosophical sense, precisely because it's a measure of self-protection, right?
So,
Geshe is saying that, so firstly, there could be an element of self-cherishing connected even with trying to diminish the self without the correct philosophical understanding. And that also shows that trying to minimize the self without that understanding does not necessarily become an antidote to self-grasping. So did this answer you, Carol? We got there.
Right. I wasn't in any way saying that this mind is an antidote.
No, I know you didn't say that, but that's what Geshe chose to share.
So, yeah, the answer nearly got there. What I'm saying is the impulse to make oneself more important can be a reflection to make oneself unimportant, and both them be a kind of attachment to the self.
Ke chempo yimpa soya, dang ke chempo mepa soya, yang dang zin dang drewa yochogires. Nga ke chempo nga mi chung chung yin mi nyong chung yin pet like nupa ma chung ya gichedu, di yang dang zin dang drewa yochogires. Rwa ke chempo ma yimpa. Yeah. He said it could, depending on the way of thinking of the person. It's possible. Yeah. Yeah.
So for practice, you have to work just as hard to get rid of the completely unimportant attached to self as to the overly important attached to self. Both of them require a lot of work.
Oh yeah, no, this is actually I talk about this in my thesis. This idea is one that His Holiness struggles with, how bad people think about themselves here, how much people diminish themselves as a way of self-protection.
But it's an aspect.
Yeah, His Holiness it was a foreign idea to him, right?
Yeah, but it is an aspect of self-cherishing to sub-value the self, which requires just as much work as the overvaluing of the self.
Right. Right. But then there's a leap that, yeah, okay. Nganso shukchunga soya kechempo mayimpa soya, nganso kechempo yimpa soya, dapo res, karinsa na tama soso sunkyop chea git kunong yena, dene rangchen zin dapo res. Ane nganso tengso mepa duksha yimpe samsu yang mepa soya tabji chega resa.
Yeah, they do was. Yeah.
Yes, you could argue this. Yes.
Thank you. I shall show this talk to some people who are talking about this and thinking. So thank you so much.
Yes, no, you're welcome, Carolyn. Thanks for bearing with us. Yes, sometimes we're trying to bring two worlds together in a space of communication, which is fruitful, but sometimes it does take some time. Dave, you've been waiting. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add, Dr. Gabon-Marte illustrates how this whole mechanism comes into play. A child receives trauma, but from the person who's taking care of them. The child doesn't have the capacity to care for themselves. They're dependent on the one harming them. So what happens is the child thinks the problem isn't them, the problem is me. There's something wrong with me. And that eventually develops into a form of self-anger, that develops into a form of self-harm. It's not a question about the existence of the self. It's a question of a form of negative self-cherishing.
Ko doksho gi rangchen zen dabochi lagire dua puku chung pala amala duksha yana dene pala amala nepa katsu kiena konso kala dang kampa dang chatsangwa pala dang amala la tene chungi yotsang konso tsepa gi chupa di rwa konso gi kyun mare ngarang gi kyun res samlo tang chik dua ko dev di se resa
me ta te to sonso yaga ji ya rwas o ngaro gi dal le ka no ala tene konso ngal kane tege dus tene sono to yaga rwas
adi malap konso ti halepe kane tege res de ya ti apoyo mare sorry
me soso pena mi no da chamboso tene no sona
ya
ani gigi to tene san lo ta yin shi to rwa tene pawa me shi to no je pogi ya
mare di mare di sheshi tani mare no tru chikyang me pa pala amla duksha yana konso tsewa gi choba kadi ne soe dabo chikre
tene so si wala ma das
di segeres
tene te kare
tene dela tene rwa pala amala duksha mares rwa nga pala dang amala kala gogires kampa gogires dela tene dene o konso tsepa gichoba di ngarangi notru res ngarangi kyen res dene soso kange duksha chikyong gire duas
me ta te ya te demore ta te mi sonsen yoga yuki ki kashi yu churwa o ta te chato du jare du gare te sonse ya mares
yeah so Geshe said it's really contextual here, right? So if it's a good parent or teacher who, for example, is admonishing somebody because they've done something wrong, and the person sees that and they're like, I did something wrong and therefore I need to look at myself and improve myself, then it's not a problem. But yes, if it's a meaningless sort of like abuse situation that's internalized, then he could see this misunderstanding arising. Yeah.
Dr. Gabon-Marte says there's two kinds of trauma. One where something that should not have happened happens, so being beaten for no good reason. And also when something that should have happened does not happen, never receiving care and love.
And so kale kaksha di chung goya chik chungi omares serna pala amala jampa dang ningjene maraya ane yang ma chungya di chungya res perna gimsen mepa tungyagi netsu dabo shikre duas
ta te do ya lila omares ta te pama koroso shi chembor was ta ina ta pa pagalo ta kadina kangere kolende de teniso no to ya mene ta te kala kawres.
Yeah, so Geshe said that he thinks what the Buddhist proposition to this would be is that to on the immediate level, take care of the parents that are abusive, but also to understand how this works on a karmic level, which he said that's the part that is very difficult psychologically. And he said, it's not just children, right? Like we can be in in an abusive situation and have this as a pattern, right? So yeah, it's very complicated. And also again, we can have two parents and two children, and the parents are very effective at helping and nourishing and raising one child, and whatever they do for the other child doesn't seem to work and seems to harm the child, the same strategy of parenting. So there's many layers of karmic complexity here. So to be clear, on the conventional level, in the abuse situation, the father and the mother are the ones who are at fault here. But these causal relationships and trauma that unfolds and unfolds, there's a karmic story behind that as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So I think we're 40 minutes over, so perhaps we should leave it here, but we can continue next time. One thing he wants to share. Yeah. So it is for this reason that regard and concern for the parents to the child, from the child to the parents, that this is something that is important to cultivate, because that's how we can solve these in a meaningful way. So the father and mother, ideally, right, they should be kind teachers, like His Holiness often reflects that the first person whom he learned about compassion and love from was from his mother, just through seeing how she lived her daily life. And so Geshe said he realizes that not everybody comes from like, an intact family, right? Things happen. But for those who are in a situation where they're growing up with both parents, if the parents are molding these qualities of love and compassion, then that creates an environment free from abuse where the child can improve and improve. Right. And then the child can carry those values forward and also bring more happiness, more love, and compassion with the people that they form relationships with. So he wanted to leave it on a positive note, so that's where we're going to leave it for today, folks.
Thank you.
And we can revisit this next week. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. See you later. Thank you.